All right, hi everyone. We've got our next quarterly ENFOS Expert Series webinar that we're doing today. The topic is additional information and records. We're going to spend the next hour, maybe a little less than an hour, talking through this topic, going through examples, and working through some questions. So I'm your speaker. My name is Tori Behrens. I'm the Director of Customer Success at ENFOS, and I'm going to be leading this session today. I'm doing this today from my home office, as well as I'm sure many of you are. And we're going to talk about the endless possibilities, right, for additional information. I know a lot of clients are already using additional information in some form, but we wanted to talk through more examples and more use cases and really get the most functionality you can out of this, this functionality in ENFOS, right? You can create, manage, and report data fields custom to your business. This functionality is already included within your ENFOS subscription and can be created today. We'll show example use cases, modules available, and how it can be used for reporting. So this webinar, it's recorded, right? Just like all of our webinars. It's going to be available in the new tab page within ENFOS, right? So when you log into ENFOS, if you open up a new tab, you're going to see this webinar. It'll be after June 5th when this link will be available, as well as all of our previous webinars, right? Some of those I'm going to be referencing today. So, you know, if I reference something you're not so familiar with, those previous webinars are all in that new tab page. Everyone here is in listen only mode. So if you have any questions or comments, we have the chat box within your GoToMeeting webinar panel. If you did not already, you can minimize that panel using the red arrow. We've got a team here answering questions along the way. And at the end of our webinar today, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So feel free to use that question box. All right, I'm on the webinar today with George Burnett from ENFOS. I know many of you know him. So he's going to be chiming in at the end with our questions. And he'll be the primary person answering your questions along the way. All right, so additional information. I know, as I mentioned, a lot of our clients are already using additional information within ENFOS in some form or capacity. But there's a lot of other use cases that can be there, and really that's what we want to talk about today, as well as introduce anyone who is not familiar with this functionality to what can be used. Additional information is exactly as it sounds. It's a way to add in additional fields within ENFOS's standard data fields. We also refer to this as add info, AIF, or custom fields. Today, I'm going to really focus on just calling it additional information. So the output, and we're going to look at a lot of examples, but the output looks custom, right? But in reality, it's just configured, right? It's configured within ENFOS. And it's managed by your ENFOS administrator or whomever has correct access and permission. This includes, you know, group organization, permission access controls for viewing as well as editing, field requirement parameters, and reporting outputs. ENFOS has full functionality to manage different types of data, including spreadsheet style tables that we refer to as records. And you know, the advantage of using additional information especially as we sit here potentially working from home, right, is that you have all of your data in one place on the web, right? Accessible through ENFOS. Right, your financial data is already in ENFOS. Maybe your site master data, maybe your compliance or activity data. And now you can add in any of these other data fields within ENFOS. It's all in one place. It's based off of the hierarchy and permission-based. So I think as we, get in and look at the examples, you're going to start brainstorming, seeing some other use cases, and how you can utilize this functionality in ENFOS more. All right, so here's our first screenshot. There's two answer types available, fields and records. And you can see examples of both on my screen. The field is in the top group, right? So I've got a field division here in bold with my answer North Valley division, right? And I have many fields listed here within this group. There's a single question with a single answer. Whereas records, my record group is at the bottom of the page under waste stream tracking. And here my fields are up as column headers, right? As a spreadsheet style. And my rows are unique answers. And there can be one or many rows. There is a primary key, something within the setup that makes each row unique. We've got each and every unique. All the fields and records are managed within the group. So here we have two groups. We have the additional information group and the waste stream tracking group. These groups control user permissions, hierarchy, access, and really organize the fields and groups. So the groups use the organization, the fields are the questions, and then the records can have multiple entries per question. ENFOS is automatically recording the last modified by and the last modified on anytime a user edits these fields or records and clicks save. So that's automatically tracked within your additional information. And edits to any of these fields get recorded in the history section, right? So any additions, any edits, anything changed gets recorded in the history at the bottom of the page. All right, so we have a lot of different groups, right? We've and I wanted to add in some examples. So from what we see from some of our clients, right? And if you're sitting in on here, you might see one that you're already using, or you may see one that, maybe you're managing outside of ENFOS and you could move that data tracking into ENFOS. Now, of course, this is just a sample, right? There's endless possibilities to set up your groups, and there's no limit, right? There's no limit on the amount of groups you have or the fields within those groups. So, some examples we have: risk and opportunity registers, right? We can also look at our waste tracking. That was the example we showed on the previous page with records. We also have, some clients doing issue tracking. We've got some consideration checkboxes, right? Have you considered at this site this scenario? And then the users use a checkbox, yes or no. We see some conceptual site modules, modules, some hydrogeological data, issue tracking, we'll see, as well as some general ledger coding, additional locations, right, for that general ledger coding, as well as some land and building information. So start brainstorming on how your company can use additional information and the types of data you'd like to store within ENFOS. Today, throughout the webinar, you'll see lots of examples, take some notes, and talk about it internally, as to if that would also apply to your company. All right, so module integration, right? We've looked at some examples of additional information fields and records. And where can this apply? Where can we see this and use this within ENFOS? Now, we can set up anything within the hierarchy in ENFOS, but we've got specific modules where additional information is available, and we're expanding these modules all the time. So we can add this to the site and the AOC modules within ENFOS, as well as any level in your hierarchy, right? We know you can have up to 20 levels, can manage this information on any of those levels in the hierarchy. You can manage it within your proposal module, and we'll look at some examples a little later where we can see information in the proposal screens. We can manage it within your vendor company information. That's under the admin module where all the vendor companies are added. And then finally in compliance, right? And we'll look at some examples in compliance for both the permits and the audit section. Now, records do have some limitations on which modules they can be added to. We'll talk about that as we work through. But fields can be added to everything shown here. And right, those fields are the one question, one answer. And the advantage of storing additional information in unique modules is that it puts the information within context. And we can set these fields as mandatory and require that each time a new item is created, these fields have to be answered. So we'll look at proposals soon, but you can imagine, right? You add a new field to your proposal summary screen, and now your users have to populate that before they can create their proposals, right? It gives you a lot more configurability on how your users are using ENFOS. And remember, right, each group has permissions associated with it, and those overlap with the module access. So if you don't have access to the compliance module, then you don't have access to the additional information within the compliance module, right? So it overlaps with your permission usage. So let's look at some usage within one of these modules. I decided to start with our vendor module. And here we can see our vendor information, right? This is that vendor page within ENFOS. And there's a new section here, right? The top 4 sections, which I have closed, are these standard sections. But I have this additional information section at the bottom that's expanded. And within this, there's vendor data that is specific to tracking additional fields that SAP needs when we send over financial transactions for this vendor. This information is available for all the vendor companies within ENFOS, right? And the SAP retail vendor number would be different for each vendor company, right? But I'd see those same fields for each vendor company. I have permission to edit it, so I can edit those fields. And of course, I can import this data in bulk. So it's a great way to add this information, right, that's specific to the vendor on our vendor page. It would not make sense to add this information to the, the site or the AOC module. And, only the vendors that have access to view this page could even view this section. And even more so, by this group, there's specific permissions associated with this group. So maybe you don't even allow your vendors to access this information. It's really up to the administrator who creates the group when they create it, what type of permissions and who can control them. So the answer type here that we see, it's really like a free text field, right? There's no limitations there. Within ENFOS, we have lots of answer type options. When the administrator creates additional information, they define those answer types, and there's a lot of choices. The answer type defaults what option the user sees when answering the question, and this really helps control the type of answer the user can submit. And it helps with the data quality. If I want a date, I set the answer type to date or date and time, and that's all that's accepted, right? So I don't have to worry so much about data cleansing because I'm configuring what my answer type is when I create this, this field or record. We've got a couple to talk about here. So, most commonly we see this alphanumeric free text. It's just really a free text box. Numeric similar, right? But it is only numbers allowed. Valid values are really awesome. And you see valid values throughout ENFOS. It's those drop-down menus, right? Where you can only select one valid value from the list. The valid values for additional information are custom. And what it does is it allows the administrator to create their valid value list when they create the question. So for example, maybe my field was facility type. I can add in the valid values that my organization uses for facility type, and then that's all that can be selected. Comment box, this one's a little newer. If you're a client that has been using ENFOS for a while, I know you're really familiar with the ones we've talked about. The rest of these are a little newer. Comment box is just like alphanumeric, but it's larger, right? It's a bigger box for the users to type in, and it just makes it easier. Checkbox is cool, right? Instead of using a yes or no valid value list, we can do a checkbox, and the user can use that checkbox to verify that what they have entered is a yes, right, by checking it. Formulas are really, really cool. ENFOS has basic numeric formulas where we calculate the answer based off of other fields entered by the user within additional information. This is not designed to replace Excel and the amazing things Excel does, but it's a basic output of math, right? Think about, addition, subtraction, multiplication. It would show that formula in the output in the screen. So again, putting it all in one location. And right, it's easy then. You can rely on ENFOS to do the calculation and not the users. Currency percentage, straightforward. Any of the fields can be set as mandatory or active. And within records, you can set them as a primary key, right? Which combination of the entries makes that row unique? That's a primary key. All right, so we've got a couple of pages to talk about groups here. And, we get a lot of questions, and I think when clients first start using additional information, they have a tendency to group everything within a single group. But the groups really have some functionality within them. You can see here, each one of my gray lines is a group, right? And if I expand those, there's either fields or records or maybe both within that group. Within this one that I've expanded, we have different format outputs, right? What we talked about on the previous slide. You can see I've got a date output, some valid value outputs for my tank grade, some numeric outputs. So those field types define kind of what I'm seeing. Permissions are controlled at the group level, giving full control to what can be seen and edited. Maybe consultant users don't have access to the retail management. Go back here. The retail management group. They would not see this section at all. It wouldn't even exist to them. We also have permission controls to allow users to view but not edit. When the administrator creates the group, they define that default permission, and then they go to the user permission groups and grant access to these additional information groups, by each group. So really considering, the user permissions when you create the groups is an important, feature. Groups are used for organization as well, right? Because I have a lot of data on this page, the group allows me to organize all of my fields. All groups are defined within the hierarchy, right? Maybe my property register is only applicable in the United States. So I don't see this section, this group at all if I'm at a node in Canada. So it's really cool. It allows you to, specify your additional information within your hierarchy. We'll talk more about this later, but you can pull any of the fields into some of ENFOS's existing reports and add them to the end of the report, like the financial planning detail report or the site or AOC report. It's a really cool way to customize the ENFOS reports. And if you think about this, we get requests for this a lot, right? Can you add one more column to my invoice report? Using additional information, you can. So consider how the additional information fields can be used for, not only tracking, but also reporting. I have another slide of groups here to really kind of show more information. We've got a percentage share, potential trigger events as a group. And as I mentioned, each one of these have different and unique permissions. I see the edit button because I have access to edit. Maybe specific users cannot edit these fields, they can only view them. So it gives users a lot of options, as well as the administrators, on how they want to manage these groups. All right, so groups really make the sections obvious, but what if your additional information wants to be maybe more seamless and kind of blend in? If you're familiar with the ENFOS site summary screen, you'll see that the fields at the bottom of the page are additional information. They're not standard fields, right? My standard fields are up at the top of the page, kind of ending here at comments. Down here, I've got my additional information fields. These are managed in the summary section. And to the users, they look part of the same section. We recommend when doing this to use the same permissions as you have for the site summary, right? If your consultants can edit the site summary, they should be able to edit this additional information that's embedded within the site summary. The benefit here really is visibility and ease of use, right? It's all part of one section, and the users don't need to scroll down. Now, this can be used in conjunction with the groups in the additional information section that we've showed already. There's no limit, right? You can combine both of them and use both sections at the same time. What's nice about adding the additional information in the summary, and I know for some of the clients we implemented a while ago, they said, maybe we don't use origin. Maybe we instead call it type. And instead of, at the time we didn't have a way to do that, they might have fit something in that didn't match their terminology. By having the additional information in the site summary, you can really fully configure this site summary section to have the specific terms and organization how you want to see it. I'm going to talk about different modules in ENFOS and how we can use both the summary and the additional information groups sections, either one by one or both of them. And I think that'll be pretty clear in my upcoming slides. Okay, so next we're going to look at the proposal summary, right? And this is a little newer, and not all of our clients are using additional information within proposal. So this is when you add a proposal, and we've configured an additional information question to be shown. Now this one is maybe set as mandatory, and the user has to enter this field before they can move on to the next screen on creating the proposal. My question here is authorization for submission received. Users are going to see this as they're creating the proposal. We can report out on this field using report criteria and some of our existing reports, like the PO spend report. You can include this field to report out. Just a note, records cannot be stored within summary sections. It's just these fields that can be stored. You can imagine trying to embed a table here could make it very complicated. So we keep those completely separate. Now, this is what it looks like in the proposal summary. I'm going to go to my next page, and I see my proposal details section, right? My documents, here's my whole proposal, and I have an additional information section, right? This is outside of that proposal summary. Now, again, both of these can be used at the same time, or maybe you pick one or the other. Here we've got notable details as our additional information field. And the decision between a unique group, like I'm showing here, or the summary that I showed on my last page, should be based on what information needs to be stored and the permissions required around those fields. So think about this, I know a lot of you track really important information in your proposals. So it's a really great way to use this additional information within your proposals. All right, let's talk about a few different modules. Compliance. So if you're not familiar with compliance in ENFOS, it's really, really amazing. And I have a webinar on it, right? Go into ENFOS, open your new tab, and there is a pretty recent compliance webinar where we talk about both permits, which I'm showing here, and our audits submodule, which I'll show next. Now, with the permits module, it has the option for the summary that I'm showing here, as well as the separate group section. But I'm just going to show this one screenshot. Again, this really goes back to the data in context, right? We can look at this question, the permit location description, here at the bottom of my page, and it makes sense to be associated with the permit. It does not make sense to be stored within the site module, right? Because it's very specific to this permit. Each permit I add at this node is going to have this additional information field to be entered, right? Because they might be different for each permit. My question here is the permit location description, right? I'm describing where this permit is stored, right? Which drive, etc. This is exactly the same as that proposal screen we just looked at, but different selections. I realized in my example, I'm just showing one option. A reminder, you can have as many as you want, right? All right. Next is our compliance audits. And, again, I'm going to reference that other webinar. A note on the compliance audit, it does have some similarities to additional information, right? Where our administrators get to create their own audits or checklists. Then they define the questions within them, the answer types, etc. It's really amazing. It's great functionality. So the additional information as it applies to compliance audits, it's stored within each audit question. This gives the administrator who is creating the audit an option to have more fields per question. In my example, my additional fields are reference ID, question response, and question number. This is created and answered when the admin creates the audit, right? The goal here is that this gives additional details to the auditor when they're answering their audit. And these additional details may be required or needed for reporting outputs for the audit information. The administrator defines which questions in the audit have additional information visible, since it may not apply to every single question within the audit. It can apply though, right? And it's applicable to apply to all types of audit questions, right? Parent questions, sub-questions, no matter what the answer type is on the audit, it can be set up. It's also available to be used within all sections in the audit. And when the user, right, goes to answer the audit, they're going to see this reference ID, question response, and question number in just like the question field, right? It's going to be listed there and give them that information they need to have everything to answer that audit or checklist question. So really cool. If you're not familiar with compliance audits, definitely check out that webinar video. All right, let's talk about importing and reporting. And we've got a lot to talk about here. I know every time we do a webinar, one of the important things for all of our users is, can we export or report out this information? And can we import this information in bulk? And of course, with anything in ENFOS, the answer is yes. And I'm going to talk about that specific to additional information here. So for importing the fields answering, it can be imported using our custom fields import. These are found under admin file transfers, the module site, which I'm showing here, and the import type. Now, I didn't do a live demo here, right? And there's a specific reason for that. As our client administrators build out their additional information, these imports and reports change automatically, right? And the fields, the columns within these imports change based off of what the administrator adds. So the import formats tab here at the top of my page is really important because it's going to show the fields that are available for the client. Those fields then can be used for the importing. Now, a note to my administrators, we're going to talk about this on our next slide too, but well, a couple slides from now. A note for my admins, we can import the creation of additional information. And George Burnett, he's on the call. He is fantastic at this, as well as the other members of our team. But this is really important if you're testing additional information first, which I always recommend for our admins, right, to do a test in integration or our test system prior to moving it to production. What's great about importing the setup of the additional information is that you can use that same file then to import that data into production. It makes it super easy to do testing and then get the data into production. We can import everything for the setup, right? The valid value lists, the answer types, the group organization, right? It can all be imported. It's really, really cool. So again, you can import the creation of the additional information as well as import all the answers. Okay, so let's talk about reporting. There are 4 additional information reports. These are all found under the reporting module, under the administrative or the admin section. And these all have report criteria to define your outputs. This is the primary means to export the data. And what's really fantastic about these reports is they're very similar to the imports I'm showing up here, right? So you can export the data, make your edits, and then re-import the data on this import format page. I do know some of them do have slight additional columns that need to be added, but for the most part, they're very similar. So it's a really great way to do data updating. I'm going to talk about that a bit more. Now, as you look at these 4, you're probably saying, these names look very, very similar, and what makes them different, right? And the difference here is columns and rows. And we heard from our clients, right? They want to see one node with all of the additional information fields as columns, right? So we created a report for that. And then we heard it the other way, right? We want to see the fields as rows, the answers. So we created it both ways. It's just it's the same information, one as columns, one as rows. I know some of our clients, right, and this is as a recommendation from ENFOS, have disabled some of these. So you might not see all 4 because your admin has already gone in, taken a look and said, you know what, this is the one we want. This works for us. We'll disable the other ones so there's no confusion. Just a note on that, admins, you can always rename these too. And I've seen some pretty creative names on some of these. So we've got fields and records separate, right? That's because the records can have a lot of data in them. So we needed a different way to report out those records than fields. Report criteria is really important here because the report criteria will define kind of that groups, right? Your group information, and you may not want to report out on everything. So, we get a lot of questions on how do I remember to update this data, right? So you can load this data in, but how are you going to remember to update this over time? I talked about that last modified on and last modified by, that's automatically recorded. That data reports out in these reports, right? So you can see the last time you updated those fields. It's great for an administrator to really track their users to see if they're updating their fields. What I recommend, and this is not unique to additional information, you could do this any report in ENFOS, is running one of these reports and saving it as a favorite. Maybe give it a name like update this information, right? You save your report as a favorite, and then you go to the scheduling submodule under reports, and you schedule a report to run automatically. Maybe this information needs to be updated quarterly, right? So you schedule this report to run automatically every quarter. Again, I'm talking about this, all of the reporting information I'm talking about is in our reporting webinar. So if you want to learn more on reporting, we've got a reporting webinar. Okay, so we saved it as a favorite. We scheduled it to run quarterly. This report is going to come to an email to you or anyone else you define in the distribution list with the report as an attachment. And because you named it something clever, right, like update this information, that's your reminder to update those fields. You can update it in your Excel spreadsheet, save it, and then go to the import page to import the data. Right, reporting webinars. We talked about everyone's going to go and watch that reporting webinar now. Okay, so a lot of information in reporting. Now, these are the specific additional information reports. But I've referenced a couple times through this webinar that we can add in report criteria in existing ENFOS reports to add in additional information. And what this does is it adds in additional information columns at the end of that report, right? So think of your invoice report, an amazing invoice report. It has so much data, but maybe you like to filter that report by your branch manager. What you do is you add in your additional, you add in report criteria to your invoice report. And there's this section in the report criteria, additional information fields. Again, fields, not records. So just fields. You click to add a field and there's a list of all those fields you have access to. You can add one or many of those fields, and this is going to throw those fields right at the end of your invoice report. It's so amazing. It's so powerful. It really gives you a way to customize your ENFOS reports. It's an important tip. I hope you're paying attention. We're going to kind of keep talking about it here. We get a lot of requests too. We want this information added to this report. Or our clients will tell us, we run the invoice report, we download it, and then we do a VLOOKUP to add fields from another report. Maybe additional information can solve that one step and automatically add that in. It also adds a lot of opportunity on, what kind of additional information fields you want to add to ENFOS. Maybe you didn't think that information needed to be added to ENFOS, but now that you can automatically add it into some of your ENFOS reports. It makes it a lot easier. It gives you more ideas on what data you're going to add in. So some other example reports on where you're going to see this additional information fields, and this is not a full list, right? This is just some examples. We've got this in the PO spend report, the well-loved financial planning detail report, site information, AOC information, right? So it's available in a lot of areas. It's really, really cool. If you're going to take anything away from this, know additional information in your report criteria. Look for it as you're running reports in ENFOS. Okay, so the last big thing I want to talk about here, specific for my administrators, right? How to create this. And we briefly talked about how to do this in the additional information importing. But it's super simple to add it through the user interface. Again, totally recommend doing this in integration first. But under admin, there's an additional information submodule. You select that, and you're going to see these three options. You open the group section, and you can click Add. And ENFOS walks you through the selections. You give your group a name. You define the hierarchy that it's going to apply to. You define the module, right? Is it applicable to compliance, proposal, site, AOC, or vendor? Then you start to add in your fields and or records. For each one you add, you define the answer type, and if it's mandatory, if it's active, if it's a primary key indicator. Finally, you define the groups. So within there, you define the default minimum permission, right? Can everyone who has a user account see it, edit it, modify it? When you click Save, the last step is to go back under your admin module and go to your user permissions. And there'll be a new row within your user permissions with the name of the group you just created. And then you grant access to that group to your permission groups, right? You tell your consultants what the consultant permission group, right, what they have access to. Yeah, again, always test an integration first. So, okay, we hope you found this webinar valuable, and we've provided more information on how additional information can be used within ENFOS. Please brainstorm with your clients and users on additional information groups that can be added in ENFOS. George, I'm going to roll it over to you. I'm going to have a sip of water for some questions, and then I've got just a few more notes here on some future enhancements.
Yeah, hi everybody. Tori, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yep.
Great. This is George Burnett with ENFOS, and we've got some questions here from throughout the webinar that I'm going to be answering. The first one here is around the formulas. How is the formula seen in the UI? And the formula is actually stored in the backend with the group configuration. In the UI, the only value that you'd see associated with the formula is the output value.
Yeah, that's right. It kind of looks like that last modified by and last modified on, where it's almost like a view only.
Yeah, so in the edit page, if a user is adding additional information, content, or modifying existing content, you don't actually see the formula field in the edit page because it's something that ENFOS calculates once you save. So the actual formula itself is stored with the group configuration in the admin additional information section. Next question here is around the importing and exporting, about how the reports can export the data as both a column format or as a row format, and can that be done with importing as well? And the answer is yes. Both the imports and exports can both use column or row type files. I have another question here about conditional formatting, if ENFOS currently supports conditional formatting between multiple fields within a group. Not currently. It's something that we have been evaluating, but do not have planned to release at this point. The couple of clients that we have that are doing something similar to this is they'll have two questions with, or two fields, I should say, with similar names, where one field is the alphanumeric answer type and the other field is a score associated with the previous field's answer type, and both need to be populated. But there's no conditional formatting between them, where the answer type from the first field defines the score in the second field.
George, that's a great answer, and that kind of leads to some of these other future enhancements that we have planned, and we always like to share these with you, on our webinars. We're planning on rolling this out to additional modules, right? We talked about the proposal compliance module already. Our future plans are to roll this and to continue to roll it to other modules, right? So if it doesn't exist somewhere you want to see it, let your ENFOS admin know. They'll pass that note on to us. We also noted the report criteria, where you can add in those fields to existing reports. We want to, obviously continue to roll that out to any additional reports where it is not already present. And then we're also having the additional information in our standard BI data sets, right? So for our clients using BI within ENFOS, having all that additional information in those BI data sets. George, go ahead. Any other questions?
We do. We have a couple more questions. One is, how many fields and groups can I have? And the answer is as many as you want. We don't have a limit for the number of groups. There's no limit for the number of fields, no limit for the number of records. Final question here, actually two more questions. For the permissions associated with the fields and records, how do those work? And the answer is they work just like all of the existing ENFOS user permissions. Each group has its own report, view, modify, and add delete permission that's automatically added to your client's list of permissions that can be assigned to the user permission groups as needed. So if a new group is created with fields and records, those can be restricted to specific subsets of users that can view or modify and add that data based on their permissions for that group. Let's see, we have another question here about what information do I have to include when importing? Do I have to include all columns or just the ones I need? That's a great question. So the standard imports for this data include all fields for all of your groups. But something special about this import is you only have to import the column headers for the fields that you want to update. So if across your entire system you have 100 different additional information fields set up, but you're only updating 2 of those fields, you only need to include those 2 columns in your import file.
Yeah, and importantly, right, if you include columns and have the answer as a blank, ENFOS would overwrite the existing values, right? So you need to be careful and make sure that, when you're importing, you're not overwriting anything with blank values. That's why we have integration for testing.
And we're having some more questions roll in here, Tori. So we've got one here. Is the call recorded and will it be made available? Yeah, so all of our webinars are recorded. Shoot us an email if you need the link. Otherwise, they'll be posted in the ENFOS application not too long afterwards. Got one more question here, Tori.
All right.
In the import format for the site custom fields, I can pull out the template, but where can I find the valid values?
Yeah. Let me scroll back here. One more. All right, so, if you're on this import formats tab, you would select your import type, and the bottom of the page will actually populate with the format, which would include the valid values available. Not pictured, it's kind of like right over here where my mouse is. There's 2 links, and one's download the template, which downloads the column headers, all of them, right? You might want to delete the ones you're not using. The other option is download the format, which downloads the format which should be shown on the bottom of the page with those valid values. And of course, right, because this is a web application, and we know that as new things are updated in ENFOS, it's going to automatically update that format. So we always recommend, looking at this format in screen.
That is
All
all
right,
we had, Tori.
great. Well, as I mentioned, we really appreciate everyone's time today, and thank you for attending the webinar. And we will talk to you again soon. Take care, everyone.